Maya Rodriguez never imagined that losing her husband would mean losing everything else too. When the funeral flowers were still fresh, her in-laws made their intentions clear. The leather jacket, the motorcycle, the tattoos covering her arms, none of it belonged in their pristine world. They threw her and her 2 children out onto the street, calling her trash that had somehow fooled their son into marriage. What they didn't know was that their dead son had secrets. Big secrets. The kind that come with offshore accounts and trust funds worth more money than their family had ever seen. For months, Maya scrubbed motel floors and fixed engines just to keep her kids fed, while her former in-laws lived in their mansion, convinced they had rid themselves of an embarrassment. But what happens when the woman you threw away like garbage suddenly becomes worth $200 million? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain fell steadily on Riverside Cemetery, each drop seeming to echo the weight pressing down on Maya's chest. She stood beside the mahogany casket, her weathered leather jacket dark with moisture, one hand resting on 8-year-old Tommy's shoulder while 6-year-old Sarah clung to her leg. Marcus would have laughed at the irony, his family's insistence on this sterile, manicured cemetery, when he'd always said he wanted to be buried in the hills where they used to ride. Eleanor Rodriguez stood across the grave like a sentinel of disapproval, her black Chanel suit pristine despite the weather. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her cold blue eyes never once met Maya's. Beside her, Richard Rodriguez checked his gold Rolex with the same impatience he'd shown throughout the service. The message was clear. This was their show, their grief, their son. Maya's fingers unconsciously traced the worn collar of Marcus's leather jacket, the one she'd grabbed from their closet before Eleanor's people had changed the locks. Hidden in its inner pocket were documents she hadn't had the heart to examine yet. Insurance papers, bank statements, things that seemed trivial now that he was gone. The jacket still smelled like him, a mixture of motor oil, leather, and the cologne she'd bought him last Christmas. "Dearly beloved," the minister continued in his practiced cadence, "we gather today to remember Marcus Anthony Rodriguez, devoted son, loving husband, and father." Maya noticed how he emphasized son first, as if the other roles were afterthoughts. She'd met this minister exactly once, at the funeral home when Eleanor insisted on someone appropriate, rather than the pastor from the small church where Maya and Marcus had actually been married. Behind Maya, a row of motorcycles sat silent in the parking lot. Her Hells Angels family had come despite the obvious hostility, their leather cuts darkened by rain, but their presence unwavering. Big Jim, the chapter president, had driven down from Sacramento with 5 other members. They stood respectfully silent, but Maya could feel their protective energy, their readiness to defend her if these people pushed too far. Sarah sniffled against Maya's leg, and she gently stroked her daughter's dark hair. Both children had Marcus's eyes, deep brown and kind. Tommy tried to stand straight, like the little man he thought he needed to be, but she could see his lower lip trembling. Neither child understood why Grandma Eleanor wouldn't speak to them, why she'd turned away when they'd tried to hug her at the funeral home. The minister spoke about Marcus's childhood, his education at private schools, his bright future in business before he'd lost his way. Maya's jaw tightened. Lost his way. As if loving her and choosing a life of freedom over their gilded cage had been some kind of moral failure. As if the man who'd worked 2 jobs to support his family, who'd taught Tommy to ride a bike and sang Sarah to sleep every night, had somehow been less than what he could have been. Marcus had been 25 when they met at a motorcycle rally in Sturgis. She was 22, working as a mechanic at her uncle's shop, covered in grease and proud of it. He'd rolled up on a brand new Harley that he clearly didn't know how to handle properly. When she'd offered to show him how to adjust his clutch, he'd looked at her like she'd offered him the moon. "You know about bikes?" he'd asked, and she'd laughed. "Honey, I was rebuilding engines before I could properly reach the pedals." They'd talked for hours that night, sitting by a campfire, sharing stories about freedom and family and dreams. He'd told her about his parents' expectations, their disappointment in his choices. She'd told him about growing up in the club, about loyalty and brotherhood, and finding your own path. When he'd kissed her 3 days later, she'd known her life had changed forever. Now Eleanor stepped forward to drop a white rose on the casket, her movements precise and cold. Richard followed, then gestured impatiently for Maya and the children to approach. Maya lifted Sarah into her arms and took Tommy's hand, walking the few steps that felt like miles. "Goodbye, Daddy," Sarah whispered, her small voice barely audible over the rain. Tommy placed his hand on the smooth wood. "I'll take care of Mom and Sarah," he said solemnly. Words that broke Maya's heart and made her proud simultaneously. Maya leaned down and pressed her palm against the casket. "I love you," she whispered. "I'll protect them, I promise." As they turned away, Eleanor's voice cut through the rain like a blade. "The children may visit on supervised occasions," she announced to no one in particular. "Once appropriate arrangements have been made." Maya stopped walking. The implications hung in the air like thunder before lightning. She turned slowly to face her mother-in-law, rain dripping from her hair. "Excuse me?" 3 days later, Maya stood in the kitchen of what had been her home for 6 years, staring at the legal document in her hands. The letterhead was expensive, embossed, the kind of paper that spoke of old money and older lawyers. The words swam before her tired eyes. Notice to quit and deliver up possession of premises. Eleanor Rodriguez sat at the dining room table like a queen holding court, her manicured fingers drumming against the polished mahogany surface. She wore a cream-colored blouse and pearls, as if evicting her son's widow was just another social obligation. Richard stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the street as if expecting photographers to document this moment of family triumph. "Surely you understand," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the tone she might use with a particularly slow child. "This house belongs to the family. Marcus was always welcome here, of course, but now that he's gone," she let the words hang in the air like smoke. Maya folded the papers carefully, her hands steady despite the rage building in her chest. "This was our home, where my children have lived since they were babies. Your children," Richard said without turning from the window, "will always have a place in this family, but appropriate accommodations must be made." The word appropriate hit Maya like a slap. She knew what it meant in their language. It meant without her. It meant supervised visits and controlled environments where Tommy and Sarah could be slowly molded into proper Rodriguez children, scrubbed clean of any trace of their mother's influence. Upstairs, she could hear the children's voices as they played in Tommy's room, blissfully unaware that their world was about to collapse again. Sarah's laugh drifted down the stairs, the same musical sound that had once made Marcus stop whatever he was doing just to listen. "I see," Maya said quietly. She pulled Marcus's motorcycle keys from her pocket, the metal warm from her body heat. The key ring held 2 keys, one for his Harley, one for hers. He'd insisted on matching bikes after they married, said they were a team and teams stayed together. "And what about our things, our furniture, our clothes, the children's toys?" Eleanor's smile was razor-thin. "I'm sure you'll find everything you need at whatever establishment you choose to frequent. There's a storage unit that's been rented for 30 days. Anything you wish to claim should be removed immediately." Maya walked to the mantelpiece where their wedding photo still sat in its silver frame. It showed her and Marcus on his bike just after the ceremony, both of them grinning like teenagers who'd just pulled off the greatest prank in history. Her dress was simple white cotton, his suit was borrowed, and they looked absolutely radiant. Eleanor had refused to attend the wedding, claiming a sudden illness. "You never approved of me," Maya said, picking up the photo. "Not from the first day Marcus brought me home." "My son was a romantic," Eleanor replied. "He saw potential where others saw limitation." The word stung because Maya knew what Eleanor really meant. She saw trailer parks and broken homes, addiction and arrest records that didn't exist. She saw the scars on Maya's hands from years of mechanical work, the small tattoo on her wrist that marked her as property of the Hells Angels motorcycle club, not in the way outsiders imagined, but as family, as protection, as belonging to something bigger than herself. "Mom?" Tommy appeared at the top of the stairs, his 8-year-old face creased with confusion. "Are we going somewhere?" Maya's heart broke a little more. Yes, baby, we're going on an adventure. Like camping, Sarah's voice called from Tommy's room. Something like that. Maya kept her voice steady, though she could feel Eleanor's satisfied smirk without looking. Why don't you two pack your favorite toys and clothes? Just the important stuff. As the children thundered back into Tommy's room with the resilience of youth, Maya turned back to her in-laws. You're making a mistake. Richard finally turned from the window, his expression mildly curious. Are you threatening us? I'm telling you that Marcus loved his children more than anything in this world, and he loved me enough to marry me despite your disapproval. That should tell you something about what kind of man you raised, even if you can't see it. Eleanor stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced grace. Marcus was confused. Men his age often are, especially when they encounter certain types of women who specialize in such confusion. But children are resilient. They adapt to proper guidance. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't just about the house or even about money. This was about erasing her completely, turning her children against everything she represented. You have until Friday, Richard added, consulting his watch. The locks will be changed at 6 p.m. sharp. Maya nodded once, then climbed the stairs to help her children pack their lives into garbage bags. Behind her she heard Eleanor making phone calls, probably to their lawyer, their insurance company, their country club friends, who would all nod sympathetically about the difficult situation and praise her for handling it with such dignity. But Maya Rodriguez had survived worse than entitled in-laws. She'd built engines from scrap metal and raised babies in a one-bedroom apartment. She'd weathered addiction in her family, violence in her neighborhood, and the kind of poverty that teaches you to fight for every scrap of happiness you can find. They thought they were throwing away garbage. They had no idea they were declaring war on a woman who had never learned how to surrender. The plastic keycard for room 237 felt flimsy between Maya's fingers as she stood outside the Sunset Motel, her children flanked on either side like small soldiers awaiting orders. The neon sign buzzed and flickered above them, casting an intermittent pink glow across the cracked parking lot. 2 garbage bags held everything they owned now, and her Harley was loaded down with additional belongings strapped to the back like some desperate caravan. Tommy clutched his backpack tighter, his eyes wide as he took in their surroundings. A man in a stained undershirt leaned against the railing 2 doors down, smoking a cigarette and watching them with curious indifference. A woman's voice carried from somewhere nearby, raised in anger about unpaid bills and empty promises. This wasn't the kind of place Maya had ever imagined bringing her children. Is this our new house? Sarah asked, her small hand finding Maya's. It's temporary, Maya said, sliding the keycard into the slot. The light blinked red. She tried again, forcing herself to move slowly, deliberately. Green light. The lock clicked open. The room smelled like industrial disinfectant, barely masking decades of cigarette smoke and human desperation. 2 double beds dominated the small space, their bedspreads a faded pattern that might have been flowers once upon a time. A small table and 2 chairs sat beneath a window that looked out onto the parking lot. The carpet was clean but worn thin, and the bathroom door hung slightly askew. Maya set the garbage bags down and forced a smile. Well, it's not so bad. Look, we each get our own bed. Tommy dropped his backpack and immediately began exploring, his 8-year-old curiosity overriding his uncertainty. He tested the light switches, examined the television remote, and peered into the bathroom. Sarah remained close to Maya, thumb creeping toward her mouth in a habit she'd abandoned months ago. I'm hungry, Sarah whispered. Maya checked her wallet for the 3rd time that hour. $247. She'd paid 3 nights at the motel up front, $90, leaving her with enough for maybe a week of careful spending. The job applications she'd filled out over the past 2 days sat in her jacket pocket like lottery tickets, each one a hope that might pay off or disappear into the void of corporate indifference. How about McDonald's? She suggested, knowing it was the cheapest option that would fill their stomachs. At the drive-thru, Maya ordered 2 Happy Meals and a small coffee for herself. The teenage worker's voice crackled through the speaker with practiced boredom, reciting the total that would consume another $15 of their dwindling resources. She handed the food to the children in the motel room and watched them eat while her coffee grew cold. Her phone buzzed. "Big Jim," from the chapter. "How you holding up, sister?" Maya stepped outside to take the call, leaving the door cracked so she could hear the children. "We're managing." "That's bullshit and you know it. Rosa's got a spare room and Mike's got space in his garage apartment. You don't have to do this alone." The offer was genuine, she knew. The Hells Angels took care of their own, and she'd been part of the family since she was 17. But accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like proving Eleanor right about her inability to provide for her children. "I appreciate it, Jim, but I need to figure this out on my own." A long pause. "Marcus wouldn't want you suffering for pride." "Marcus isn't here," she said, the words coming out harsher than she'd intended. "I'm sorry, I need to do this my way." Back inside, Tommy had constructed a fort using pillows and the small table, while Sarah colored in a book she'd retrieved from her backpack. They were adapting with the resilience of childhood, finding adventure in uncertainty. Maya envied them that ability. She spread the job applications across one of the beds and began filling them out. Her work history was solid. 8 years as head mechanic at Rodriguez Auto, 2 years before that at a smaller shop. But she knew what employers saw when they looked at her. The tattoos on her forearms, the calloused hands, the address that would soon be a roadside motel. The television murmured softly in the background, some sitcom about people with problems that could be resolved in 30 minutes. Sarah had fallen asleep curled against Maya's side, her small body warm and trusting. Tommy sat cross-legged on the other bed, studying his mother with eyes too old for his face. "Are we poor now?" he asked quietly. Maya considered lying, offering some gentle reassurance about temporary setbacks and upcoming opportunities. But Tommy deserved honesty. "We don't have much money right now," she said. "But we have each other, and we're going to be okay." "Grandma Eleanor said Daddy's money would take care of us." "Grandma Eleanor says a lot of things." Tommy nodded solemnly. "She doesn't like you very much." "No, she doesn't. But that's her problem, not ours." Outside, a motorcycle roared to life in the parking lot, the sound so familiar it made Maya's chest ache. She thought about Marcus, about the plans they'd made and the future they'd imagined. He'd always talked about buying land somewhere, maybe starting their own shop, building something together. Those dreams felt like artifacts from someone else's life now. Tomorrow she would start over. She would find work, secure better housing, create stability for her children. Tonight, she would lie on the thin carpet between their beds and listen to them breathe, grateful for this temporary shelter and determined to prove that sometimes the woman everyone throws away is exactly the one who refuses to stay down. Maya's work gloves were already stained dark with cleaning solution by 10 a.m., the leather softened from hours of scrubbing bathroom tiles and changing bed linens. The Sunset Motel wasn't glamorous work, but Rosa Martinez, the owner, had taken one look at Maya's calloused hands and hired her on the spot. "You know hard work," Rosa had said in her thick accent, gesturing toward Maya's motorcycle in the parking lot. "And you got kids to feed. That's all I need to know." The pay was $8 an hour, cash at the end of each day, with the promise of more hours if Maya proved reliable. It wasn't much, but it was honest work that allowed her to stay close to Tommy and Sarah. The motel had a small playground behind the office where the children could play while she cleaned nearby rooms. Room 212 was a disaster. Someone had apparently tried to cook something in the bathroom sink, leaving a greasy residue that required 20 minutes of scrubbing. Maya worked methodically, her movements efficient from years of maintaining motorcycles to precision standards. Clean thoroughly, check everything twice, leave no detail unfinished. The same principles applied whether you were rebuilding an engine or removing mysterious stains from carpet. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" Tommy appeared in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Sarah's crying." Maya stripped off her gloves and followed him to the playground, where she found 6-year-old Sarah sitting on the bottom of the slide, tears streaming down her face. A small group of children from the apartments across the street had gathered near the fence, their voices carrying cruel childhood observations about the motel kids. "They said we're homeless," Sarah whispered when Maya knelt beside her. "We have a home," Maya said firmly, lifting Sarah into her arms. "It might not look like other people's homes, but it's ours." She carried Sarah back toward their room, Tommy walking alongside them. The other children dispersed with the guilty speed of kids who knew they'd been caught being mean. Maya made a mental note to speak with Rosa about the playground situation, but for now, she needed to get Sarah calmed down and Tommy to school. "Can I stay home today?" Tommy asked as they reached room 237. "School is important," Maya replied, though she understood his reluctance. The bus picked him up from the motel parking lot each morning, marking him as different from his classmates who got dropped off by parents in minivans and SUVs. After getting the children settled, Maya returned to work. Rosa was waiting in the office, counting the morning's cash receipts with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to track every penny. "My nephew Carlos needs some work done on his Kawasaki," Rosa said without looking up. "You interested in some weekend cash?" Maya's heart jumped. "What kind of work? Clutch is slipping, and it's making a noise he doesn't like. He's willing to pay $50 if you can fix it." $50 was more than 2 days' cleaning wages. Maya nodded quickly. "I can take a look Saturday morning." That weekend, Maya spread her tools across the motel parking lot and attacked Carlos's motorcycle with the focused intensity that had made her reputation at Rodriguez Auto. The clutch plates were worn beyond acceptable limits, but she managed to adjust the cable tension and clean the mechanism enough to buy him several more months of reliable riding. Carlos was a construction worker with sun-weathered hands and a gold tooth that flashed when he smiled. He paid her the $50 and promised to spread word among his friends that there was a reliable mechanic working out of the Sunset Motel. "You got skills," he said, testing the clutch action. "My boss has a fleet of work trucks that need maintenance. You interested in real money?" Within 2 weeks, Maya had developed a small but steady side business. Construction workers, delivery drivers, and other working people who couldn't afford dealer prices brought their vehicles to her on weekends. She worked in the motel parking lot, her tools laid out on a tarp, while Tommy and Sarah played nearby or helped by handing her wrenches. The money wasn't enough to move out of the motel yet, but it was enough to buy better food, to replace the children's outgrown clothes, to start building a small savings account. More importantly, it gave Maya something she'd been missing since Marcus died: the satisfaction of skilled work, the respect that came from solving problems other people couldn't. One Saturday evening, as Maya was washing grease from her hands at the outdoor spigot, a familiar rumble filled the parking lot. Big Jim's Harley, followed by 3 other bikes from the chapter. They parked in a neat line and approached with the careful respect men showed when entering someone else's territory. "Heard you're back to turning wrenches," Big Jim said, dismounting from his bike. "Word gets around." "It does, when you do good work." He gestured toward his bike. "Got a charging problem that's got me stumped. You got time to take a look?" Maya glanced toward their room, where Tommy and Sarah were visible through the open door, working on homework at the small table. This was the moment she'd been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. The Hells Angels had always been family, but accepting work from the club meant something different than fixing Carlos's clutch or adjusting carburetors for construction workers. "Rates the same for everyone," she said finally. Big Jim grinned. "Wouldn't expect anything less." As Maya opened her toolkit once again, she felt something shifting inside her chest. For the first time since Marcus's death, she was beginning to remember who she'd been before she became someone's wife, someone's mother, someone Eleanor Rodriguez could dismiss and discard. She was Maya Rodriguez, and she could fix anything with an engine. Sarah's drawing was carefully folded and tucked into Maya's wallet, right behind her driver's license. The crayon artwork showed 3 stick figures standing beside a motorcycle, a tall figure with long dark hair, a medium figure with spiky hair, and a small figure with pigtails. Above them, Sarah had written "My Family" in uneven purple letters. Maya had found it slipped under their motel room door one morning, Sarah's way of reminding them all that they were still together, still whole, despite everything that had changed. The drawing crinkled slightly as Maya pulled out a $20 bill to pay for groceries at the corner market. 3 months at the Sunset Motel had taught her to shop carefully. Pasta, ground beef, vegetables that would stretch across multiple meals. The children had adapted to their new routine with the remarkable resilience of youth, treating their temporary home like an extended camping trip rather than a sign of their reduced circumstances. "Can we get the cookies?" Tommy asked, eyeing a display of chocolate chip packages near the checkout counter. Maya hesitated for a moment, calculating. Her weekend mechanical work had brought in $200 this week. $200. A personal record. Carlos had referred her to his supervisor, who'd hired her to maintain a small fleet of delivery trucks. The work was steady, honest, and paid well enough that small luxuries were becoming possible again. "One package," she said, and Tommy's grin made the expense worthwhile. Back at the motel, Rosa was waiting in the office with a cup of coffee and a proposition. The older woman had become something between an employer and a friend over the past months, offering practical advice and occasional childcare when Maya's mechanical clients needed evening or weekend work. "My cousin runs a garage in Riverside," Rosa said without preamble. "He needs a good mechanic, someone who can handle the complicated stuff. Pays $15 an hour plus commission on parts." Maya set down her grocery bags carefully. $15 an hour was nearly double what she made cleaning rooms, and the commission structure could add significantly more. But it would mean leaving the motel, finding new housing, probably moving the children to another school district. "It's a good opportunity," Rosa continued, "but I understand if you're not ready to make changes." Through the office window, Maya could see Tommy and Sarah playing on the swings, their laughter carrying across the parking lot. They'd settled into this life, made friends with other children in the complex, found stability in routine. Tommy had even joined the school's chess club, something that required staying after school twice a week, but gave him a sense of belonging he'd been missing. "Can I think about it?" Maya asked. That evening, she sat on the edge of her bed while the children watched television, mentally weighing options. The garage job represented security, advancement, a chance to use her skills in a professional environment again. But it also meant disruption, uncertainty, the risk of trading known problems for unknown ones. Her phone buzzed with a text from Big Jim. "Heard about Riverside. Proud of you either way." The Hells Angels network extended further than most people realized. Information flowed through the community like current through electrical circuits, keeping everyone connected and informed. Maya appreciated the support without feeling pressured. The club had always respected individual choices, understanding that loyalty didn't require identical paths. Tommy appeared beside her bed, his expression serious in the way children get when they're trying to solve adult problems. "Mom, are we going to move again?" "Maybe. Would that bother you?" He considered this with 8-year-old gravity. "Will we still be together?" "Always." "Then it's okay. Sarah might be scared, though." Maya looked toward her daughter, who was absorbed in cartoons, thumb unconsciously moving toward her mouth. The security they'd built here was fragile but real. Sarah had nightmares sometimes, waking up confused about where they were, reaching for toys or stuffed animals that had been left behind in their previous life. "What do you think about Mummy getting a new job?" Maya asked when Sarah joined them for bedtime. "Will you still fix motorcycles?" "Yes, but in a real garage with proper tools and everything." Sarah's eyes brightened. She'd always been fascinated by Maya's weekend work, carefully organizing tools and watching the mechanical processes with intense concentration. "Can I help?" "When you're older." That night, after the children were asleep, Maya sat outside their room and called Rosa's cousin. His name was Eddie Martinez, and his voice carried the same practical warmth as Rosa's. They talked for 30 minutes about experience, expectations, and opportunities. He offered her the job without meeting her, based solely on Rosa's recommendation and the reputation Maya had built among the local working community. "When can you start?" he asked. Maya looked through the window at her sleeping children, then at the drawing on her nightstand. 3 stick figures, still together, still family, regardless of where they called home. 2 weeks, she said. "I need time to find housing and get the kids enrolled in school." "Take 3 weeks if you need it. Good mechanics are hard to find." After ending the call, Maya walked to her motorcycle and ran her hand along the gas tank. Marcus had bought this bike for her as a wedding present, insisting she needed transportation that matched her spirit. The Harley had carried her through the worst months of her life, serving as both practical transportation and emotional anchor. Tomorrow she would tell the children about their new adventure, help them understand that moving forward didn't mean forgetting the past. They would pack their few belongings once again, but this time they were moving towards something better rather than away from something lost. Eleanor Rodriguez held the estate documents like a victory banner as she settled into her favorite leather chair in the study. The papers were thick, expensive, bearing the seal of Morrison, Keller and Associates, the law firm that had handled Rodriguez family business for 3 generations. Everything was finally in order, properly documented, legally airtight. The unpleasant business with Marcus's widow had been resolved with the efficiency she expected from competent legal counsel. The house reverts to family trust ownership. Their attorney, James Morrison, had explained during their morning meeting. Mrs. Rodriguez has no legal claim to community property given the prenuptial agreement your son signed. Eleanor had smiled at that detail. Marcus had been reluctant to sign the prenup, but she'd insisted it was standard procedure for families of their standing, protection against fortune hunters and gold diggers. Richard emerged from his office carrying a glass of scotch despite the early afternoon hour. Morrison called. The title transfer is complete. We officially own the house free and clear. Eleanor nodded with satisfaction. The house had been in the Rodriguez family for 40 years, a sprawling Mediterranean-style estate in the exclusive Hillcrest neighborhood. Property values had tripled since Richard's father had purchased it, making it worth nearly $2 million now. The thought of that woman and her children living there had been unbearable. What about the other properties? Eleanor asked, referring to the rental houses Marcus had purchased during his marriage. All documented under the family trust. Morrison says we can begin liquidating them immediately if we choose. Richard settled into his matching chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Though he recommends keeping them as investment properties, the rental income is substantial. Eleanor opened her appointment book, scanning the upcoming social calendar. The country club's annual charity auction was next month, followed by the Hospital Foundation Gala. Events where she could hold her head high again, where concerned friends would offer sympathy for her loss without the embarrassing undertone of discussing Marcus's inappropriate marriage. We should plan a proper memorial service, she decided, something fitting for Marcus's memory. The church can accommodate 300 guests. Richard raised an eyebrow. We already had a funeral. That was a burial. This would be a celebration of life. An opportunity for Marcus's real friends to pay their respects properly. Eleanor's voice carried the subtle emphasis that distinguished between Marcus's real friends and the motorcycle people who had attended the funeral like some kind of leather-clad honor guard. She walked to the window overlooking their manicured gardens, where a crew was installing new landscaping. The expense was significant, but they could afford such improvements now. The rental properties generated monthly income that would fund their lifestyle improvements indefinitely. I'm thinking of renovating the kitchen, Eleanor continued. Something modern, suitable for entertaining. That woman never appreciated the potential of the house anyway. Richard joined her at the window. The club's planning committee wants us to host the spring fundraiser, 500 guests, full catering, the works. Eleanor smiled. Hosting club events was both honor and obligation among their social circle. It required significant financial commitment, but provided immeasurable social capital. Now they could accept such opportunities without concern about expenses or appropriateness. Her phone rang, the caller ID showing her sister Margaret from San Francisco. Margaret had been diplomatically absent during the recent unpleasantness, but Eleanor knew she'd been following developments with keen interest. Eleanor, darling, how are you holding up? We're managing, Margaret. It's been difficult, but we're finally able to focus on moving forward. I heard about the housing situation. Probably for the best, really. Those children need stability, proper guidance. Eleanor settled back into her chair, savoring the conversation. Margaret understood the complexities of family responsibility, the sometimes painful decisions required to protect children from unsuitable influences. "We're planning supervised visits once appropriate arrangements can be made," Eleanor explained. "The children are Rodriguez family, after all. They deserve better than motel rooms and motorcycle culture." "Of course they do. Have you considered private schools? Military academy might be good for the boy, teach him discipline and proper values." The suggestion appealed to Eleanor. Tommy was 8 now, old enough for structured education that would counteract years of inappropriate influence. Sarah could be enrolled in a proper girls' academy, somewhere that emphasized deportment and cultural refinement. "We're exploring options," Eleanor said. "Money is no longer a constraint, thankfully." After ending the call, Eleanor retrieved a legal pad and began making lists. Private school tuition, therapy sessions to address whatever trauma the children had experienced, proper clothing that didn't scream second-hand shop. The investments required would be substantial but worthwhile. Richard appeared with a second scotch in the mail. Among the usual bills and social invitations was a thick envelope from their insurance company. Marcus's life insurance policy, another detail that could finally be resolved properly. "How much?" Eleanor asked. "500,000, plus the accidental death benefit." Richard's voice carried satisfaction. "Morrison says it should be processed within 30 days. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Marcus had been responsible about insurance, whatever his other failings. The money would fund the children's education and provide security for their future. Proper security, managed by people who understood long-term planning rather than spending every dollar on immediate gratification. Evening was approaching, painting their garden in golden light that emphasized the beauty they'd worked decades to create. Tomorrow they would begin the renovation planning, start the school research, take the first steps toward creating the kind of life Marcus should have provided for his children. They'd rescued the family name, protected the family assets, and positioned themselves to guide 2 young lives toward appropriate futures. Eleanor felt the deep satisfaction of problems solved and responsibilities properly managed. The tool belt sat perfectly across Maya's hips, its worn leather molded to her body after 6 months at Martinez Auto. Each pocket held specific tools arranged in the precise order she'd developed over years of professional work. The belt represented more than equipment, 19C. It was a badge of competence, a symbol of her return to skilled labor that demanded respect rather than pity. Eddie Martinez had been skeptical when Rosa first recommended her. Female mechanics weren't uncommon, but most shops preferred hiring men for the physical demands of automotive repair. Maya had changed his mind within her first week by diagnosing a transmission problem that had stumped his other 3 mechanics for 2 days. "You got instincts," Eddie had told her, watching her trace electrical circuits with the focused intensity of a surgeon. "Can't teach that." Now, she was his lead diagnostic technician, handling the complex problems that required both experience and intuition. The other mechanics, Iso, Carlos, Jimmy, and old Pete, had initially treated her with the polite distance men showed women in traditionally male environments. But respect in a garage was earned through competence, not conversation, and Maya's ability to solve problems had quickly established her place in the hierarchy. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" Tommy appeared in the garage doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder and chess trophy in his hand. "I won." Maya grinned and wiped her hands on a shop rag. Tommy's chess skills had improved dramatically since they'd moved to Riverside. The school had a strong program, and his teacher had entered him in regional competitions where his methodical thinking style proved surprisingly effective. "3rd place in the district tournament," Tommy announced proudly. "That's amazing, baby." Maya examined the small trophy, its brass figure holding a night piece. "Your dad would be so proud." Sarah burst through the door behind her brother, her face flushed with excitement. "Mom, guess what? Mrs. Peterson wants me to be in the school play. I get to be a flower." At 7 years old, Sarah had inherited Marcus's natural charm and Maya's mechanical curiosity. She spent afternoons at the garage, carefully organizing tools and asking endless questions about how engines worked. Eddie had started teaching her basic maintenance tasks like checking oil levels and identifying different types of wrenches. "A flower sounds perfect," Maya said, lifting Sarah into a hug that left small grease smudges on her school dress. The apartment they'd rented was small but clean, a two-bedroom unit in a working-class complex where most residents minded their own business and judged people by their actions rather than their appearance. The children had their own rooms for the first time since leaving Eleanor's house, and Maya had converted a corner of the living room into a study area where homework and chess practice happened under her supervision. Eddie emerged from his office carrying a stack of invoices and wearing the satisfied expression he got when reviewing profitable weeks. "Maya, got a minute?" They walked to the customer waiting area, where Eddie poured coffee from the pot that had been brewing since dawn. The garage specialized in honest work at fair prices, building customer loyalty through competence rather than marketing. "Been thinking about expansion," Eddie said without preamble. "Got an opportunity to buy the transmission shop next door. Need someone to run the diagnostic side while I handle the business end." Maya set down her coffee cup carefully. Partnership opportunities in the automotive industry were rare, especially for women without formal business training. But Eddie was offering exactly that. Chance to become part owner of an expanding operation. What would that involve? 20% partnership to start, with option to increase based on performance. You'd manage all the complex electrical and computer work, train junior mechanics, handle customer relations for technical problems. Eddie paused. Pay would be salary plus percentage of profits. Should work out to about double what you're making now. Maya's mind raced through calculations. Double her current salary would mean financial security she hadn't experienced since Marcus's death. It would mean better housing options, college savings for the children, the kind of stability that allowed for long-term planning rather than month-to-month survival. "I'm interested," she said carefully, "but I'd want to review the numbers, understand the expansion timeline." Eddie nodded approvingly. "Smart. Never trust anyone who won't show you the books." He handed her a folder thick with financial statements and business plans. "Take your time, but don't take too long. Opportunity like this won't wait forever." That evening, Maya spread the business documents across their kitchen table while Tommy worked on homework and Sarah practiced lines for her flour roll. The numbers were encouraging. Steady customer base, manageable debt, growth potential that justified Eddie's optimism. Her phone buzzed with a text from Big Jim. "Heard about the partnership offer. You earned it." The Hells Angels network remained her extended family, providing emotional support and practical advice without judgment or interference. They understood her journey from victim to survivor to something approaching success. More importantly, they respected the choices she'd made to build this new life through her own efforts. Maya looked around their small apartment, taking inventory of how far they'd traveled from those desperate nights at the Sunset Motel. The children were thriving, she was building professional recognition, and for the first time since Marcus's death, the future looked promising rather than uncertain. Tomorrow, she would accept Eddie's partnership offer and take another step toward the financial independence that would protect her family from ever being vulnerable to people like Eleanor Rodriguez again. The business card felt expensive between Maya's fingers, its surface smooth and embossed with raised lettering that spoke of old money and established power. Whitmore, Sterling and Associates was printed in understated gold script, followed by an address in downtown Los Angeles that Maya recognized as the financial district where only the most expensive legal firms maintained offices. The man who'd handed her the card looked completely out of place in Martinez Auto's waiting area. His charcoal grey suit was perfectly tailored, his Italian leather shoes spotless, despite the garage's inevitable coating of dust and oil. He sat with the patient stillness of someone accustomed to expensive hourly rates, his briefcase positioned precisely beside his chair. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he'd said when Maya emerged from beneath the hood of a stubborn Chevrolet. "My name is Jonathan Whitmore. I represent certain legal interests that may concern you." Maya had glanced toward Eddie's office, where her business partner was reviewing parts orders with characteristic intensity. The afternoon was busy, 3 vehicles in various stages of repair and 2 customers waiting for diagnostic results. This wasn't the time or place for unexpected legal complications. "If this is about child support or custody," Maya had said carefully. "You should know that my in-laws have made their position clear." Whitmore had shaken his head with what appeared to be genuine confusion. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this matter doesn't concern your late husband's family, at least not directly." He'd paused, studying her face with the careful attention lawyers developed for reading people. "It concerns your late husband's estate." That was when he'd handed her the business card and suggested they meet at his office the following Tuesday. 10 a.m., if that's convenient. "I believe you'll find our conversation illuminating." Now Maya sat in her kitchen, turning the card over in her hands, while Tommy practiced chess moves on a magnetic board and Sarah colored pictures of mechanical parts she'd drawn from memory. The children were absorbed in their activities, giving Maya space to puzzle through the implications of Whitmore's visit. Marcus's estate had been settled months ago through Eleanor's lawyers. The house, the cars, the rental properties, everything had been transferred to the family trust according to what Eleanor claimed were Marcus's clearly documented wishes. Maya had received copies of legal papers that seemed to support this arrangement, though she'd never had the money to hire her own attorney for independent review. But something about Whitmore's manner suggested complications she hadn't anticipated. The way he'd said, "your late husband's family," implied distance, as if he represented different interests entirely, and his confusion about custody matters seemed genuine rather than tactical. Maya walked to the small desk where she kept important papers and retrieved the folder containing documents from Marcus's death. Insurance claims, death certificate, the few personal effects that Eleanor had deemed appropriate for her to keep. Hidden among these papers was the envelope she'd found in Marcus's leather jacket, still unopened after all these months. She'd been afraid to examine its contents during those desperate early weeks when survival required focus on immediate needs rather than painful reminders of loss. Later, as stability returned to their lives, the envelope had seemed like an intrusion from the past she was trying to rebuild from. Now she pulled it from the folder and studied Marcus's handwriting on the front. "For Maya, open if something happens to me." Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside were documents she didn't recognize, account numbers, passwords, contact information for people and institutions she'd never heard of. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten letter in Marcus's careful script. "My beautiful Maya," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably struggling with problems I should have prepared you for better. I'm sorry for keeping secrets, but I was trying to protect you from my family's interference. They don't know about the accounts listed here, and they can't touch money that's held in offshore trusts." Maya's heart began beating faster as she continued reading. Marcus described investments he'd made without his family's knowledge, money he'd earned and saved through business ventures they'd never suspected. The numbers he mentioned seemed impossibly large, hundreds of thousands of dollars in accounts she'd never known existed. "The lawyer listed at the bottom represents my interests independently of my family's legal team. His name is Jonathan Whitmore, and you can trust him completely. He has instructions to contact you 6 months after my death, assuming my family tries to cut you out of inheritance, as I expect they will." Maya set the letter down carefully, her mind struggling to process this information. Marcus had anticipated Eleanor's actions, had prepared for exactly the scenario that had unfolded. More than that, he'd created financial protection that his family couldn't override or manipulate. The business card suddenly felt different in her hands, not a threat, but a lifeline, not a complication, but a solution to problems she'd thought were permanent. Tomorrow she would call Whitmore's office and schedule that meeting. Tonight she would read Marcus's letter again and try to understand how completely her life was about to change for the second time in less than a year. The trust fund documents spread across Jonathan Whitmore's mahogany conference table like a roadmap to a country Maya had never imagined visiting. Each page represented financial complexity that dwarfed her understanding of money, investments, and wealth management. The numbers were so large they seemed abstract, disconnected from any reality she'd experienced. $237 million, Whitmore said quietly, his voice carrying the careful precision lawyers used when delivering life-changing information. That's the current valuation of your late husband's offshore portfolio, including real estate holdings, investment accounts, and business interests. Maya stared at the documents without speaking. The conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Los Angeles, where traffic moved like blood cells through arteries of commerce and ambition. She felt completely disconnected from that world, a woman in work boots and mechanics' coveralls, sitting in a space designed for people who moved millions of dollars with phone calls and signatures. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Marcus worked construction. We lived paycheck to paycheck." Whitmore opened a thick folder containing what appeared to be years of correspondence and financial records. "Your husband was remarkably gifted at investment strategy. He started with a small inheritance from his grandfather, money his parents never knew about, and built it into substantial wealth through careful real estate purchases and technology investments." The lawyer slid a photograph across the table. It showed Marcus at what appeared to be a business meeting, wearing a suit Maya had never seen, shaking hands with men in expensive clothing. He looked confident, professional, completely different from the man who'd come home each evening covered in construction dust. "Marcus maintained this separate financial identity for 8 years, Whitmore continued. "He used a different name, Marcus Anthony, for all business transactions. His family believed he was working construction jobs, but he was actually managing a growing investment portfolio and acquiring commercial properties throughout California and Nevada." Maya picked up the photograph, studying Marcus's face for signs of deception or stress. Instead, she saw the same quiet intelligence that had attracted her initially, the same careful planning that had made him an excellent husband and father. "Why didn't he tell me?" "Fear," Whitmore said simply. "Fear that his family would discover the money and find ways to control it. Fear that knowledge of wealth would change your relationship or make you a target for their manipulation." He paused, consulting his notes. "Marcus was very specific about protecting you from his family's influence." The lawyer explained the elaborate structure Marcus had created, offshore trusts that couldn't be touched by family lawsuits, investment accounts held in names that didn't appear in any public records, real estate purchased through shell corporations that provided complete anonymity. Every detail had been designed to keep the money invisible until Maya needed it. "The trigger for revelation was your eviction from family property," Whitmore said. "Marcus predicted his parents would try to control you through housing and financial pressure. He wanted you to have time to establish independence before learning about the inheritance." Maya thought about those months at the Sunset Motel, the desperate job applications, the careful budgeting that made every dollar count. Marcus had been protecting her even then, giving her the chance to discover her own strength before offering the security that could have undermined her confidence. "What about Eleanor and Richard? Do they know?" "They have no knowledge of these assets. Your husband's will, the one they've been executing, covers only the properties and accounts they knew about. This inheritance exists completely outside their legal reach." Whitmore handed her another document, a power of attorney form that would give her immediate access to accounts containing several $1 million for immediate needs, with the remainder held in trust structures that would provide long-term security and tax advantages. "Your husband left detailed instructions about managing this wealth responsibly," the lawyer continued. "He wanted you to have choices without pressure, security without dependency. The trust can fund your children's education, provide for your retirement, support charitable causes you care about." Maya's hands shook slightly as she signed the preliminary documents. The signature felt surreal, as if she was authorizing someone else's fantasy rather than claiming her own inheritance. "How long have you been planning this meeting?" 3 years. Marcus updated his instructions every 6 months, adjusting for changes in your family situation and his investment performance. Whitmore's expression softened slightly. "He loved you very much, Mrs. Rodriguez. Everything he built was intended to give you freedom, TBD freedom from his family's control, freedom from financial worry, freedom to raise your children according to your own values." Outside the conference room windows, the city continued its relentless pace of commerce and ambition. But Maya felt suspended in time, caught between the woman who'd entered this office an hour ago and the woman she was apparently destined to become. "There's one more thing," Whitmore said, producing a sealed envelope marked with Maya's name in Marcus's handwriting. He asked me to give you this after explaining the financial details. Maya took the letter with trembling fingers, knowing it contained Marcus's final words about the choice he'd made to keep this secret and the trust he'd placed in her to use his gift wisely. Marcus's personal letter was written on simple notebook paper, the kind he'd always preferred for important thoughts. His handwriting filled 3 pages with the careful precision she remembered from grocery lists and birthday cards, each word chosen deliberately. Maya sat in her car in the law firm's parking garage, engine running for warmth, reading her husband's final explanation by the dim overhead light. "My dearest Maya," the letter began, "I know you're angry with me right now, and you have every right to be. Keeping secrets from you goes against everything we promised each other about honesty and partnership, but I hope you'll understand my reasons once you see what my family is capable of when money is involved." Maya paused, remembering Eleanor's cold efficiency in executing the eviction, the casual cruelty with which she'd dismissed Maya's role in Marcus's life. He'd predicted his family's behavior with uncomfortable accuracy. "I grew up watching my parents destroy relationships for financial advantage," Marcus continued. "They drove away friends, manipulated business partners, and used money as a weapon to control everyone around them. When I fell in love with you, I knew they would try to use wealth to separate us or change us into people we didn't want to be." The letter described Marcus's gradual realization that conventional success, a.s., working in his father's business, living according to family expectations, would never provide the freedom he wanted for his wife and children. So he'd created an alternative, building wealth through investments while maintaining the appearance of modest middle-class life. "The construction job was real," he wrote, "but I was also spending every spare hour learning about real estate markets, technology stocks, international investments. I wanted to create security that my family couldn't touch, couldn't manipulate, couldn't use against us." Maya thought about those evenings when Marcus claimed to be working late, the weekend fishing trips that had sometimes seemed vague in their details. She'd trusted him completely, never questioning his explanations, because dishonesty had never been part of their relationship. Now she understood that his deception had been motivated by protection rather than betrayal. "I know you're probably thinking I should have told you everything, brought you into the planning process. But Maya, you're too honest for the kind of financial maneuvering I was doing. You would have insisted we share the money with family, help friends in need, live more openly. Your generous heart would have made you vulnerable to people who see kindness as weakness." The observation stung because it was accurate. Maya would have wanted to help Rosa with the motel's financial struggles, would have insisted on supporting Hell's Angels members going through hard times. Marcus had understood her character well enough to know that knowledge of wealth would have created obligations she couldn't refuse. "The hardest part was watching you worry about money," Marcus wrote. "When you stressed about Tommy's school supplies or Sarah's doctor visits, I wanted to tell you everything would be okay. But I needed you to develop your own strength, your own confidence, before you had access to resources that could make you dependent rather than empowered." Maya wiped tears from her eyes, understanding now why Marcus had insisted she maintain her mechanic skills, why he'd encouraged her partnership with Eddie despite their family's financial stability. He'd been preparing her for independence she didn't know she would need. "By the time you read this, you'll have survived whatever my family put you through. You'll have proven to yourself that you can provide for our children, build a career, create stability through your own efforts. That strength is more valuable than any amount of money because it can never be taken away from you." The letter's final section contained practical advice about managing wealth responsibly, suggestions for financial advisors and charitable foundations, recommendations for protecting the children from the corrupting influence of inherited privilege. But it concluded with the personal message that mattered most to Maya. "I loved you exactly as you were when we met. Strong, independent, unimpressed by wealth or status. I built this fortune not to change you, but to ensure you never had to compromise those qualities for survival. Use the money wisely, but remember that your worth was never measured in dollars. You were already rich in everything that matters: Maya folded the letter carefully and placed it in her purse beside Sarah's crayon drawing. Marcus had given her two gifts: financial security and the experience of discovering her own capabilities. The months of struggle had been painful but necessary, teaching her that she could survive anything while building confidence that no amount of money could provide. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eddie. "Kids picked up from school. Tommy wants to show you his science project." Maya smiled, thinking about her children waiting at the garage, probably organizing tools and pestering Eddie with mechanical questions. They'd built a good life through honest work and mutual support. The inheritance would enhance that life without fundamentally changing who they were or what they valued. Tomorrow she would begin the complex process of claiming Marcus's legacy. Tonight she would go home to her children and think about how to honor both the gift he'd given her and the strength she'd discovered on her own. The bank account statement looked like a misprint with so many zeros following the initial digits. Maya stared at the paper for the third time that morning, trying to reconcile the number with her understanding of money as something earned through hourly wages and careful budgeting. The first transfer from Marcus's trust had deposited $5 million into an account she'd opened specifically for this purpose. $5 million! The amount was larger than the gross domestic product of some small countries, more money than most people saw in multiple lifetimes. Yet, according to Whitmore's calculations, it represented less than 3% of her total inheritance. Maya folded the statement and placed it in the locked filing cabinet she'd installed in her bedroom. The children didn't need to know about the money yet. They were thriving in their current life, proud of their mother's success at the garage, secure in routines that provided stability without excess. She wanted time to plan carefully before introducing wealth that could fundamentally alter their family dynamics. "Mom, are you okay?" Tommy appeared in her doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder and chess medal pinned to his jacket. At 9 years old, he'd developed an impressive ability to read adult emotions and respond with appropriate concern. "Just thinking about some business decisions," Maya said, which was technically accurate. Managing a fortune definitely qualified as business. "Big decisions. The biggest I've ever made." Tommy nodded solemnly. "Dad always said big decisions need thinking time." After walking the children to school, Maya returned to the garage where Eddie was reviewing quarterly financial reports with the concentrated attention he brought to complex diagnostic problems. Their partnership had flourished over the past months, with Maya's technical expertise complementing Eddie's business instincts to create steady growth and customer loyalty. "Got a proposition for you," Eddie said, looking up from his spreadsheets. "Chance to buy the property next door, expand into full-service automotive, need about $200,000 for down payment and equipment." Maya's first instinct was to offer immediate financing, to write a check that would solve Eddie's expansion dreams without affecting her inheritance in any measurable way. But Marcus's letter had warned against such impulses, advising careful consideration of how wealth could change relationships and create dependencies. "What kind of timeline are you thinking?" she asked instead. 6 months to secure financing, another 6 months for renovation and equipment installation. Bank wants to see 2 years of partnership profit before they'll approve a business loan at reasonable interest rates." Maya nodded thoughtfully. Eddie deserved the expansion opportunity, and their partnership had earned the right to grow. But she needed to find ways to help that didn't create suspicion about her sudden access to capital. That afternoon, Maya drove to an address Whitmore had provided, a modest office building where a financial advisor named Rebecca Chen managed accounts for people who needed discretion along with expertise. Chen specialized in what she called life transition wealth management, helping clients adjust to sudden inheritance or business success without making costly mistakes. "The most important thing," Chen explained during their first meeting, "is avoiding the impulse to solve everyone's problems immediately. Sudden generosity often creates more complications than it resolves." Maya described her situation carefully. The children who didn't know about their changed circumstances, the business partner who needed capital, the extended family of Hell's Angels members who occasionally faced financial difficulties. "I recommend a gradual approach," Chen said. Small improvements that can be explained by normal business success. Better housing that's nice but not ostentatious. Education expenses that seem reasonable for a successful garage owner. You want people to think you're doing well, not that you've won the lottery. They discussed investment strategies that would grow the inheritance while providing steady income for family expenses and charitable giving. Chen recommended establishing foundations that could support causes Maya cared about without creating public attention or family complications. "What about my in-laws?" Maya asked. "They believe they control Marcus's entire estate." Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "That's more complex. They have legal claim to assets they know about, but no rights to holdings they never discovered. The question is whether you want them to learn about your inheritance and how you want that revelation to occur." Maya considered this carefully. Eleanor and Richard had treated her with casual cruelty, dismissing her worth and attempting to separate her from her children. They deserved to understand their mistake, but the timing and method of that education mattered. "I want them to realize what they lost through their own behavior," Maya said finally. "But I don't want to create legal complications or public drama that could affect my children." That evening, Maya sat with Tommy and Sarah at their kitchen table, helping with homework while mentally planning their family's careful transformation. Tomorrow she would begin making small improvements, better groceries, educational opportunities, small luxuries that could be explained by garage success. The inheritance was a tool for building the life Marcus had wanted them to have, but the strength she'd developed over these difficult months was equally valuable, providing the wisdom to use wealth as enhancement rather than replacement for the values that made them a family. The investment portfolio spread across Maya's kitchen table looked like a foreign language composed entirely of numbers and financial acronyms. Rebecca Chen had prepared a comprehensive overview of Marcus's holdings, real estate in 12 states, technology stocks that had appreciated dramatically over the past decade, international funds that provided both growth and stability. "Your husband was remarkably prescient about emerging markets," Rebecca explained during their second meeting. "His early investments in renewable energy and electric vehicle companies have increased in value by over 3,000% since 2015. Maya studied the documents while Tommy practiced chess moves nearby, and Sarah worked on a school project about community helpers. The children were accustomed to their mother handling business paperwork in the evenings, though they had no idea these particular papers represented generational wealth rather than garage invoices. "I want to establish education funds immediately," Maya said, marking relevant sections with a highlighter. "Full college tuition for both children, plus graduate school if they choose it." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "Standard trust fund structure, with disbursements tied to academic performance and age milestones. We can also include provisions for study abroad, internships, and other educational opportunities." Maya had spent hours researching charitable foundations, identifying causes that aligned with her values and experiences. Organizations that supported single mothers, provided job training for formerly incarcerated individuals, and offered mechanical education to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Marcus's wealth could create opportunities for people facing the same struggles she'd recently survived. "I want to help people who remind me of where I came from," Maya explained. "But I need to do it carefully, without creating a tension or obligations I can't manage." The foundation structure Rebecca recommended would allow anonymous donations while providing tax advantages and long-term sustainability. Maya could support causes she cared about without public recognition that might complicate her family's privacy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Big Jim. "Heard through the grapevine you might be able to help with Samson's medical bills." "No pressure, just wondering." Samson was a Vietnam veteran who'd been with the Hells Angels chapter for 40 years, a gentle giant who'd spent decades helping younger members navigate life challenges. His recent cancer diagnosis had created medical expenses that insurance didn't cover, forcing the chapter to organize fundraising rides and benefit dinners. Maya responded carefully, "Business has been good. Happy to contribute to any fund you're organizing." She would donate $50,000 through a shell corporation Rebecca was establishing for such purposes. To the chapter, it would appear that Maya's garage success allowed generous support for family members in need. To Samson, it would mean treatment options without financial stress. "Tommy," Maya called softly, "what do you think about moving to a bigger place?" Her son looked up from his chessboard, considering the question with characteristic seriousness. "Would we still be close to the garage?" "Absolutely. Just a nicer house with more space for your chess sets and Sarah's art projects." "And a yard," Sarah added, hopefully from her corner workspace. "Definitely a yard." Maya had identified a house in their current school district, ICDA, a modest 4-bedroom with a large backyard and detached garage she could convert into a private workshop. The property was expensive enough to provide significant upgrade in comfort and security, but reasonable enough to be explained by successful business partnership. Rebecca had helped her understand the psychology of wealth transition. Too much change too quickly could create suspicion and stress. Better to improve their life gradually, allowing the children to adjust to enhanced circumstances without losing connection to their values and community. "I also want to do something about Eddie's expansion plans," Maya continued. "He needs capital, but I can't just hand him money without creating complications." They discussed various approaches: private investment that could be structured as normal business financing, equipment loans at favorable rates, even direct partnership expansion that would give Maya larger ownership stake in the growing business. "The key is making everything appear logical and earned," Rebecca said. "Your garage partnership is genuinely successful, so additional investment in expansion makes business sense." Maya nodded, appreciating the complexity of managing wealth responsibly. Every decision required consideration of multiple consequences, ATD, financial, personal, and social. She understood now why Marcus had spent years learning about investment strategy and wealth management before revealing his success. That evening, after the children were asleep, Maya sat on her small patio and called Jonathan Whitmore about a different kind of planning. "I want to purchase property near my former in-laws," she said without preamble, "something that would allow strategic positioning for eventual revelation." Whitmore's pause suggested he understood the implications. "Revenge planning requires careful consideration, Mrs. Rodriguez. Actions taken in anger often create unintended consequences." "Not revenge," Maya corrected. "Justice. I want Eleanor and Richard to understand what they lost through their own choices. But I want to do it properly, at the right time, in a way that protects my children." The lawyer agreed to research properties in the Hillcrest neighborhood where Eleanor's social circle concentrated their activities. Maya would take time to plan carefully, ensuring that when the moment came for revelation, it would be devastating in its precision and impossible to dispute in its accuracy. The property deed felt substantial in Maya's hands, its heavyweight paper and official seals representing far more than a simple real estate transaction. She now owned the Mediterranean-style mansion at 1247 Hillcrest Drive, directly across the street from Eleanor and Richard Rodriguez's estate. The irony was perfect. For 18 months, they'd congratulated themselves on removing the embarrassing motorcycle woman from their neighborhood. Now she was closer than she'd ever been during her marriage to Marcus. The previous owners were motivated sellers. Jonathan Whitmore had explained during the closing. "Divorce situation, needed quick sale. Your cash offer was accepted within 24 hours. Maya had paid $2.8 million for the property, a sum that represented roughly 1% of her inheritance, but would have been impossible to explain through garage income alone. That's why the purchase had been made through Riverside Holdings LLC, a shell corporation that provided complete anonymity while allowing her to take immediate possession. Standing in the circular driveway of her new home, Maya could see Eleanor's garden across the street, where a landscaping crew was installing expensive new features. The older woman appeared briefly at an upstairs window, then disappeared behind curtains that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The house itself was elegant without being ostentatious: 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen that would delight Sarah's growing interest in cooking, and a 3-car garage that Maya planned to convert into a workshop where she could restore motorcycles as a hobby. The backyard featured a swimming pool and enough space for Tommy to practice chess outdoors during warm weather. "Mom, this place is huge," Tommy said, his voice echoing in the empty foyer. At 10 years old, he'd developed an appreciation for strategic positioning that served him well in chess competitions and apparently in real estate evaluation. Sarah ran from room to room, her footsteps creating a symphony of excitement on hardwood floors. "Can I pick my own room? Can we get a dog? Will my friends from school be able to visit?" Maya smiled at her daughter's priorities. Yes to all 3 questions. But remember, we don't tell people how much the house cost or how we afforded it. We just say Mom's business has been very successful. They'd maintained their apartment lease for another month, allowing gradual transition that wouldn't create sudden disruption in the children's school routine. Maya had told Eddie and their neighbors that her partnership profits had exceeded expectations, enabling investment in property that would provide long-term security. "Smart move," Eddie had said approvingly. "Real estate's always good investment, especially in that neighborhood." The Hells Angels chapter had been equally supportive, viewing Maya's success as validation of their belief that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. Big Jim had ridden by the new house during their first week, offering approval with characteristic directness. "Place has good security, nice sightlines, solid construction," he'd observed. "You picked well." What he didn't mention, but Maya was certain he'd noticed, was the perfect positioning for observing activity at the Rodriguez estate. The Hells Angels understood strategy, and they would recognize this location's potential advantages without needing detailed explanation. Maya had hired a decorator who specialized in understated elegance, comfortable furniture that didn't scream wealth, artwork that reflected personal taste rather than investment value, technology that enhanced life without dominating it. The result was a home that felt genuinely lived in rather than showpiece perfect. The children's transition had been remarkably smooth. Tommy's chess trophies looked natural on the built-in shelves in his new room, while Sarah had claimed the sunroom as her art studio where she could work on mechanical drawings and school projects. They'd adapted to increase space and comfort without losing appreciation for simple pleasures. Maya's favorite discovery was the view from her bedroom window, which provided clear sightlines to Eleanor's morning routine. The older woman maintained rigid schedule: coffee on the terrace at 7 a.m., newspaper reading until 8, then departure for whatever social obligations filled her days. Maya found herself noting these patterns with the same attention to detail she brought to diagnosing engine problems. 2 weeks after moving in, Maya was working in her garden when she noticed Eleanor standing at her own garden gate, staring across the street with obvious curiosity. The 2 women made eye contact for the first time since the funeral, and Maya offered a polite wave that Eleanor didn't return. That evening, Maya's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is James Morrison from Morrison, Keller and Associates. I represent the Rodriguez family interests." "Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez has asked me to inquire about your recent property purchase." Maya had been expecting this contact. What specifically would Mrs. Rodriguez like to know? "She's concerned about appropriateness of your residence choice. Given the family situation, Mr. Morrison, I own property that I purchased legally with my own money. If Mrs. Rodriguez has concerns about my appropriateness, she's welcome to express them directly." Maya hung up, feeling satisfied. Eleanor's discomfort was exactly the reaction she'd hoped to provoke. The former mother-in-law was beginning to realize that the woman she'd dismissed as powerless trailer trash now possessed resources and strategic thinking that posed potential threats to her carefully maintained social position. Tomorrow, Maya would begin phase 2 of her plan, Maya's subtle integration into the social circles, where Eleanor expected to maintain unchallenged dominance. The charity gala invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock that probably cost more per sheet than most people spent on groceries in a day. Children's Hospital Foundation annual benefit was embossed in gold script, followed by details about the black tie event at the Grand Ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton. Maya recognized several names on the organizing committee, including Eleanor Rodriguez, listed as a founding patron. Maya smiled as she set the invitation on her kitchen counter beside her morning coffee. This was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, the perfect venue where Eleanor's social circle would gather to celebrate their charitable generosity while networking among their own carefully curated elite. "Rebecca," Maya said into her phone, "I want to make a donation to the Children's Hospital Foundation, something significant enough to guarantee major donor recognition at their annual gala." Her financial advisor's pause suggested quick mental calculations. How significant are we talking? $1 million. That would certainly get their attention. Anonymous or attributed donation? Maya considered this carefully. Anonymous gifts provided privacy but no strategic advantage. She needed public recognition that would position her for maximum impact when Eleanor discovered the donor's identity. Attributed. I want my name on their major donor list, and I want a speaking opportunity at the gala. Within 48 hours, Maya received a personal phone call from Dr. Patricia Williamson, the hospital's chief development officer. The woman's voice carried the carefully cultivated warmth that professional fundraisers developed for seven-figure donors. "Mrs. Rodriguez, we are absolutely thrilled by your generous commitment to our pediatric cardiac unit. Your donation will fund critical equipment that will save countless young lives." Maya appreciated the genuine enthusiasm beneath the professional polish. Unlike Eleanor's charity work, which seemed motivated more by social positioning than authentic concern, Maya's donation would create measurable improvement in children's medical care. "I'd like to attend your annual gala," Maya said, "and I understand major donors sometimes have speaking opportunities. We would be honored to have you address our guests. Perhaps you could share your motivation for supporting pediatric cardiac care." Maya had prepared for this question. "My late husband died suddenly of heart failure. I want to ensure other families don't face the same loss when medical intervention could make the difference." Dr. Williamson's response carried genuine sympathy along with professional gratitude. They scheduled a meeting to discuss Maya's speech and her potential for ongoing foundation involvement. That afternoon, Maya visited an exclusive boutique recommended by Rebecca Chen's assistant. The personal shopper, an elegant woman named Patricia, who clearly specialized in dressing new money for old money events, understood the assignment immediately. "We want sophistication without ostentation," Patricia explained, reviewing options that would position Maya as serious philanthropist rather than lottery winner. Classic elegance that commands respect. They selected a midnight blue gown that complemented Maya's coloring while projecting quiet confidence. The dress was expensive enough to signal serious resources, but understated enough to avoid accusations of inappropriate display. Accessories were chosen with similar strategic thinking: real pearls that spoke of established wealth, shoes that suggested quality without screaming designer labels. "You'll want professional hair and makeup," Patricia advised. "I can recommend artists who specialize in charity gala presentation." Maya appreciated the woman's expertise in navigating social complexities she'd never needed to understand. This was warfare conducted with fashion choices and seating arrangements rather than engines and tools, but the strategic principles remained similar. The following week, Maya met with Dr. Williamson to review her speech and tour the cardiac unit her donation would enhance. The medical equipment was impressive: monitors and surgical tools that represented the cutting edge of pediatric care. Maya felt genuine satisfaction knowing her contribution would serve children facing medical crises their families couldn't afford to address privately. "Your gift is transformational," Dr. Williamson said as they concluded the tour. "We're planning to name the new surgical suite in your honor." Maya nodded graciously while mentally calculating the impact this recognition would have on Eleanor's composure. Having a hospital wing named after the woman you'd dismissed as trailer trash would create cognitive dissonance that Eleanor's worldview couldn't easily accommodate. "Will the naming ceremony be part of the gala program?" Maya asked. "Absolutely. It's one of our most meaningful traditions, recognizing donors whose generosity creates lasting impact." That evening, Maya called Jonathan Whitmore to ensure all legal and financial structures were properly positioned for public scrutiny. Her wealth needed to appear legitimate and well-established rather than mysteriously sudden. "Everything will withstand investigation," Whitmore assured her. "Your husband's investment history creates clear documentation for inheritance claims, and your foundation structures are completely transparent to appropriate authorities." Maya hung up, feeling confident about the approaching confrontation. Eleanor had spent months congratulating herself on removing an embarrassment from her social circle. Saturday night, she would discover that the embarrassment had returned with resources and social positioning that dwarfed anything the Rodriguez family had achieved through inherited status rather than personal accomplishment. The microphone felt surprisingly light in Maya's hands as she stood at the podium overlooking 800 of the city's most influential philanthropists. The grand ballroom's crystal chandeliers cast elegant light across tables, where donors who'd given tens of thousands of dollars sat beside others who'd contributed millions. At table 12, Eleanor Rodriguez sat frozen in her chair, her champagne flute halfway to her lips, staring at the woman she'd evicted from family property 18 months earlier. Maya had spotted Eleanor immediately upon entering the ballroom, noting her table's proximity to the stage and the obvious shock that had registered across the older woman's face. Richard sat beside his wife, his expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and something approaching panic as he processed the implications of Maya's presence at an event requiring significant charitable contribution. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "my name is Maya Rodriguez, and I'm honored to address you tonight as the founding benefactor of the new pediatric cardiac surgical suite at Children's Hospital." The applause was warm and sustained, 800 wealthy individuals acknowledging generosity that had touched their shared commitment to charitable giving. Maya waited for quiet, using the pause to make direct eye contact with Eleanor, whose face had drained of color. 18 months ago, I lost my husband Marcus to sudden cardiac arrest. He was 34 years old, a devoted father to our 2 children, and a man who believed deeply in protecting the people he loved. Maya's voice carried the calm strength she'd developed through months of rebuilding her life from nothing. His death taught me that medical intervention can make the difference between tragedy and hope, between loss and healing. She gestured toward the presentation screen, where images showed the new surgical equipment her donation had purchased. "The cardiac suite we're dedicating tonight will serve children whose families face the same fear I experienced, the helplessness of watching someone you love struggle with conditions that medical expertise can address if proper resources are available." Maya paused again, noting how Eleanor's neighboring table guests were leaning toward her with whispered questions about her relationship to the evening's major benefactor. The social mathematics were clearly complicated. Eleanor had obviously not mentioned having a philanthropist daughter-in-law, creating awkward explanations she couldn't avoid. "But this donation represents more than medical equipment," Maya continued. "It represents the belief that every child deserves access to life-saving care, regardless of their family's financial circumstances. It represents hope that medical excellence should never be limited by economic barriers." The audience responded with more enthusiastic applause, clearly moved by Maya's personal connection to the cause. Several people at Eleanor's table turned to look at her expectantly, apparently assuming she would share pride in her daughter-in-law's generosity. Maya concluded her speech with thanks to the hospital staff and other donors, then stepped away from the podium to sustained ovation. As she moved toward her assigned table, positioned strategically where Eleanor would have clear sightlines throughout dinner, she felt the satisfaction of a plan executed with precision timing. Dr. Williamson intercepted her halfway across the ballroom floor. "That was beautiful, Maya. Your words will inspire others to consider legacy, giving that creates lasting impact." Around them, conversations buzzed with appreciation for Maya's presentation and curiosity about her background. Several donors approached to introduce themselves and express admiration for her charitable commitment. Maya handled each interaction graciously while maintaining awareness of Eleanor's increasing discomfort at her nearby table. "Mrs. Rodriguez." A distinguished gentleman with silver hair and expensive suit extended his hand, Charles Whitman from the University Medical Center Foundation. "We'd love to discuss partnership opportunities with someone who clearly understands strategic philanthropy." Maya accepted his business card while noting Eleanor's obvious strain at overhearing conversations that positioned the woman she'd dismissed as trash as a serious player in charitable circles, where Eleanor had spent decades building influence. Dinner proceeded with Maya fielding invitations to join other foundation boards, requests for speaking engagements, and offers of partnership in medical research funding. Each conversation reinforced her position as someone whose resources and commitment commanded respect from the city's philanthropic leadership. During dessert, Eleanor finally approached Maya's table with movements that suggested internal struggle between social obligation and personal reluctance. "Maya," Eleanor said carefully, her voice carrying forced politeness, "what a surprise to see you here tonight." Maya stood gracefully, maintaining the composure she'd learned through months of surviving Eleanor's cruelty. "Hello, Eleanor. I'm sure it is surprising, though I suppose we all process grief differently. I chose to honor Marcus's memory through charitable giving." Eleanor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your donation was quite substantial." $1 million seemed appropriate for establishing the cardiac suite, Maya replied easily. "Marcus would have approved of investing in children's medical care." The number hit Eleanor like physical impact. $1 million represented resources far beyond anything she'd imagined Maya capable of accessing. The implications were staggering. If Maya could donate such amounts casually, what did her total wealth represent? "I had no idea you were financially positioned for such generosity," Eleanor managed. Maya smiled with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned to value herself through struggle rather than inheritance. "There's quite a lot you didn't know about Marcus or his plans for protecting our family's future." The thank you card arrived on a Tuesday morning, addressed in careful handwriting that belonged to someone young enough to still believe perfect penmanship mattered. "Dear Mrs. Rodriguez," it read, "thank you for saving my heart. The doctors say I can play soccer again because of your gift. Love, Emma Martinez, age 8. Maya propped the card against her coffee maker, where she'd see it every morning, a reminder that wealth used wisely created ripples of healing that extended far beyond financial statements. Emma was the third child to send a personal note since the cardiac surgery suite had opened 6 weeks ago, each letter reinforcing Maya's conviction that Marcus's inheritance was meant for purposes larger than personal comfort. Her phone had been ringing constantly since the charity gala. Foundation boards wanted her involvement, medical researchers sought funding for innovative treatments, and social organizations competed for her attention with invitations that would have seemed impossible 18 months earlier. Maya had learned to evaluate each opportunity through the lens Marcus had provided in his letter. Maya had learned to would this enhance their family's values or compromise them? The most persistent caller had been James Morrison, Eleanor's attorney, whose increasingly desperate messages suggested his client was struggling to process the new reality of Maya's social and financial position. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I believe there may have been misunderstandings about your late husband's estate planning," his latest voicemail had said. "Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez would appreciate the opportunity to discuss family matters in a more collaborative spirit." Maya deleted the message without returning the call. Eleanor's definition of collaboration had been amply demonstrated through 18 months of exclusion and contempt. Any reconciliation would need to acknowledge past behavior rather than pretend it hadn't occurred. The children had adapted to their transformed circumstances with remarkable grace. Tommy's chess tournament travel was now funded through educational accounts that would support his development through college and beyond. Sarah had discovered a passion for theater arts, enrolling in classes at a prestigious performing academy that nurtured her natural expressiveness while building confidence. "Mom," Sarah said over breakfast, "my drama teacher wants to know if you'd speak to our class about overcoming challenges. She says you're inspiring." Maya smiled at her daughter's pride, understanding that the children were learning valuable lessons about resilience and self-worth that money couldn't purchase. Their security now came from multiple sources: 289s, financial inheritance, family bonds, personal capabilities, and community support that had proven itself during their darkest period. Eddie knocked on Maya's office door at the garage, his expression mixing business excitement with personal curiosity. Their expansion had proceeded smoothly, funded through investment structures that allowed Maya's capital contribution without revealing its true source. "Got a call from someone claiming to represent the Rodriguez family interests," Eddie said. "Wanted to know about our business relationship, how long we've been partners, whether we've received any unusual funding." Maya set down her paperwork carefully. "What did you tell them?" "That our partnership is private business information and they could talk to our lawyer if they had legitimate questions." Eddie paused. "Maya, is there something I should know about?" These people seemed intense. "They're my former in-laws. They're trying to understand how I've been able to afford certain lifestyle improvements since Marcus died." Eddie nodded slowly. "And they don't know about whatever inheritance you received." It wasn't a question. Eddie was too observant to miss the financial mathematics that didn't quite add up, too respectful to pry into personal matters that didn't affect their business relationship. "They know about part of Marcus's estate," Maya said carefully. "Not all of it. Got it. And when they find out about the rest, they'll understand that their assumptions about my worth were incorrect." That afternoon, Maya received an unexpected visitor at home. Eleanor Rodriguez stood on her front porch, wearing a charcoal gray suit and an expression that suggested internal struggle between pride and necessity. "Maya, I was wondering if we might speak privately." Maya gestured toward the living room, noting how Eleanor's eyes assessed the furnishing and decor that clearly represented significant investment. The older woman was conducting reconnaissance, trying to understand the scope of resources she'd underestimated. "I want to discuss the children's future," Eleanor began, settling into a chair that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Tommy and Sarah are Rodriguez family members, regardless of complications between us. They deserve opportunities that family resources can provide." Maya poured tea from a service that had cost $5,000 but looked appropriately understated. "What kind of opportunities?" "Private schools with proper academic standards, cultural education that prepares them for their social position, trust funds that ensure their security regardless of changing circumstances." Eleanor's voice carried the tone of someone offering generous concessions while maintaining fundamental superiority. She was proposing to rescue the children from their mother's limitations while claiming credit for magnanimous family inclusion. "That's very thoughtful," Maya said, "though I'm curious why you think I can't provide those opportunities myself." Eleanor's pause suggested she was reassessing assumptions about Maya's financial capacity. "Well, certainly your business success has been impressive, but family resources operate on a different scale entirely." Maya smiled with the quiet confidence that had carried her through 18 months of rebuilding from nothing to everything. "Eleanor, I think you might be surprised by the scale we're discussing." The family photo sat in a silver frame on Maya's desk at the Marcus Rodriguez Foundation offices, showing three people who looked both familiar and transformed from the desperate family that had once lived in motel room 237. Maya wore a simple blue dress that suggested success without ostentation, while Tommy and Sarah flanked her with the confident smiles of children who'd learned their worth through struggle and love rather than inherited privilege. 1 year had passed since the charity gala confrontation that had shattered Eleanor's assumptions about power, wealth, and social position. The foundation now operated from a renovated warehouse in downtown Riverside, employing 12 people who managed programs supporting single mothers, providing automotive training for formerly incarcerated individuals, and funding medical care for families facing financial crisis. Maya walked through the foundation's main workspace, where staff members coordinated with recipients of their various programs. Maria Santos, a single mother of 3, was completing automotive technician certification that would provide stable employment and career advancement. James Wright, recently released after 8 years in prison, had secured his commercial driver's license through foundation-funded training and now managed a small delivery business. Mrs. Rodriguez, called Jennifer Chen, the foundation's program director, the scholarship recipients are here for their quarterly meeting. Maya smiled as 12 young people filed into the conference room, high school and college students whose educational expenses were funded through the Foundation's academic support program. Each recipient came from circumstances similar to Maya's own background, proving that potential existed regardless of zip code or family bank account. "Tell me about your progress," Maya said, settling into her chair with genuine interest rather than administrative obligation. The updates were encouraging. Tommy Martinez, no relation despite the shared name, had been accepted to MIT's engineering program with full scholarship support through graduate school. Angela Foster was developing a non-profit to provide mechanical training for young women in underserved communities. David Kim planned to become a pediatric surgeon, inspired by his own childhood medical experiences and the Foundation's commitment to healthcare access. After the students left, Maya drove to Martinez Auto, where Eddie was training 3 new mechanics hired through their expansion program. The garage now operated 2 locations and maintained a waiting list of customers who appreciated honest work at fair prices. "Monthly reports," Eddie said, handing her financial statements that showed steady growth and community impact. "We're booked solid through next month, and the training program has a 6-month waiting list." Maya reviewed the numbers with satisfaction that went beyond profit margins. The garage provided good jobs for skilled workers while teaching young people trades that offered stability and advancement. It represented the kind of success Marcus would have appreciated, built on competence, serving real needs, creating value rather than extracting it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Big Jim. "Chapter meeting tonight. Samson wants to thank you again for the medical fund support." The Hells Angels remained Maya's extended family, though her circumstances had evolved far beyond anything they'd imagined when offering shelter during her darkest period. She still rode with them occasionally, maintaining connections to the community that had provided strength when strength seemed impossible. That evening, Maya sat in her home office reviewing college applications with Tommy, who'd inherited both his father's analytical mind and his mother's practical wisdom. At 12 years old, he was already thinking strategically about educational choices that would serve his interests in mathematics and engineering. "Why did Dad keep the money secret?" Tommy asked, a question that had emerged gradually as he'd begun understanding the scope of their inheritance. Maya considered her answer carefully. "He wanted to protect us from people who might try to control us because of wealth rather than respect us for who we are. And he wanted us to discover our own strength before we had resources that could make us dependent." Did it work? Maya looked around their home, thinking about the journey from motel room to mansion, from desperation to security, from victim to philanthropist. "What do you think?" Tommy grinned. "I think Dad was pretty smart." Sarah appeared in the doorway wearing pajamas decorated with motorcycles, a gift from Big Jim that she treasured despite her growing interest in theater and art. "Mum, I finished my essay about heroes. Want to hear it?" Maya nodded, and Sarah began reading her assignment about ordinary people who did extraordinary things through courage and determination. The essay described a single mother who rebuilt her life after losing everything, who used unexpected resources to help others facing similar struggles, who proved that real strength came from character rather than circumstances. "The hero in my story is my mom," Sarah concluded, "because she showed me that being knocked down doesn't mean staying down, and that real success means lifting other people up too." Maya felt tears gathering as she pulled both children into a hug that encompassed everything they'd survived and built together. Outside, her Harley sat in the garage beside Marcus's bike, both machines maintained in perfect condition for rides that honored memory while embracing the future. Tomorrow would bring new foundation programs, expanded garage operations, and continued opportunities to prove that the woman Eleanor Rodriguez had dismissed as trash had become something far more valuable in a bin, a force for healing, in a world that needed more people who understood the difference between wealth and worth.